Frenzy/Berzerk for the Atari 7800 is one of those homebrews that surprised me in more than one way. I was surprised at how affordable it can be, at just $35 for a loose cartridge. I was surprised at how well regarded it is by the community. After all, Berzerk is a game that you can play easily on the 2600, and I didn't know if Frenzy was well known among the community or not. I've never really heard it talked about. But I was also surprised that it wasn't removed from the Atari Age store during its mass exodus of games in the summer of 2023. But let's see if Frenzy has one more pleasant surprise for me and how well it was executed on the console. Seeing as how it was done by the wise and powerful Robert DeCresenzo, I have high expectations for this game. But without further ado, let's take a look at Frenzy on the Atari 7800. Frenzy was originally released in 1982 for the arcades, and was the sequel to the 1980s arcade hit, Berzerk. Lucky for us, both versions are available on this single cartridge for the Atari 7800. This port was done by Robert DeCresenzo, as I said before, and was released back in 2013. Not only does this port have both Frenzy and Berzerk, but it also has 3 different multiplayer options for each game. You can play 2-player alternating, where you take turns venturing into the labyrinths and surviving against your robot assailants. You can also play 2-player competitive and 2-player cooperative, where you play at the same time. The only difference here is whether or not you can damage one another with friendly fire. I'm sure these 2-player modes are a blast, but I wasn't able to test them for this review. It's an incredible inclusion to have all these multiplayer options, to say the least. At the main menu, you get a short tune that plays while you select your options. Let's take a look at Berzerk first, and I have to say, this is a pretty good looking version of the game. Now, don't get me wrong, Berzerk was never a beautiful or complicated game, but as far as I can tell, this is pretty accurate to the arcade. And what's this? The voices are included? Music to my ears, and it sounds pretty good. If you've never played Berzerk before, then welcome to the outside world. What was it like living under a rock? But I'll explain it quickly. You take control of a human and must shoot and avoid not only the enemy robots who shoot and chase you, but the walls as well. The walls are electrified, and even the slightest touch ends with you losing a life. You also must work quickly, as Evil Auto will spawn after some time, and chase you relentlessly until you move on to another screen. There is no killing this evil, bouncing smiley face. The gameplay is excellent, I would say almost perfect. I can't think of a single scenario where I died and it wasn't my fault. And the same can be said for Frenzy as well, which mostly plays exactly the same. The only difference is the inclusion of some equipment in some of the rooms that can immobilize the robots, or confuse them, etc. You also have some walls that you can shoot through in order to create shortcuts, or to kill enemies who are otherwise unreachable. And finally, you can bank your bullets around corners and bounce them off solid walls. Overall, these improvements make sense, and don't hinder the existing gameplay at all. But there are notably less voices in Frenzy, which could be good or bad, depending how patient you are in listening to them between each room in Berzerk. The sound in Berzerk and Frenzy is minimal, but good overall. The sounds of the shots and enemies blowing up are rewarding and satisfying. Likewise, the sound of the player dying is intense and appropriate. And intense describes this game well, as it gets very difficult in later levels, avoiding all the fast-moving enemies and their flurry of bullets. Not to mention the Evil Auto. This could possibly be one of the first horror games that many people have experienced. I still get a rush of adrenaline and dread when I hear the call of Evil Auto and see that bouncing head coming my way. I'm also really impressed with the quality of the voice samples. I think this game isn't using anything too crazy inside the cartridge, so I'm not sure how this voodoo was pulled off, but I love it. Graphically, these games are pretty close to the arcade. Really, outside of the color, I think they're near perfect, but don't quote me on that. All the rooms and enemies are one solid color, usually things like blues, whites, pinks, turquoises, and so forth. But it all looks good, and the animation of your little human running is really good too. But that's really all there is to speak of graphically. The game is pretty bare bones to look at, but that's fine, because in late levels there is a ton of bullets and enemies running around, which is impressive in and of itself. And with that, well, I don't think there's too much more to say about Frenzy on the Atari 7800. Is it perfect? Nearly, but not quite. The only major flaw I found is that enemies can shoot you through the corners of the walls occasionally, when they shouldn't be able to. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen from time to time. I think I counted about 3 times during my playthrough for this video. Again, not major, but noticeable and can lead to some anger if you get hit and killed. Frenzy and Berzerk may also be a bit too hard for soft gamers out there. It's a challenge, especially in later levels. But I know gamers that just can't make it more than a few screens. And that's a shame really, as they're missing out on a fun and intense experience. It can also get repetitive, but not as fast as you might think. It's crazy how such a simple idea can be fun without getting old really fast. But I think we can break this game down a little better in our totally awesome Atari Network pros and cons section. For the pros, while this game isn't impressive looking by any means, there can be an impressive amount of enemies and bullets on the screen. The inclusion of 2 games for as low as $35 is a great value. And all the multiplayer options are just an incredible treat for people with friends. Not me, but, other people who have friends. The voices are included and sound really good on 7800. Both games also play perfectly, and provide an intense and maybe even frightening challenge for some. For the cons, I don't have many, but let's point out a thing or two. The enemies occasionally shoot through the walls, which can be upsetting if you get hit. It doesn't happen often, mind you, but very occasionally it can. These games are also difficult for players not up to the challenge, and the game can become repetitive during especially long play sessions. But with all that said, I think it's fair to give Frenzy for the Atari 7800 Pro system 4 Pro Line controllers out of 5. It's near perfect, and for many people, well, I think they'd call it perfect. It was close to getting a 5, but I usually get a little tired of the repetition after a while. But still, it's a solid game, and a great value on the Atari 7800. Good job, PacManPlus and Atari Age. But now I want to hear from all of you. Have you played this version of Frenzy and Berzerk? Do you agree with my score? Or do you prefer a different version of these games? Let me know all this and more in the comments down below. And please consider joining the Atari Network Discord to continue the discussion with other Atarians. It's fun, it's free, and it's simple to use. Link will be in the description. We also have merch if you want to rep the Atari Network. Links in the description. Finally, I want to give a massive shout out to my Patreons. Without their support, I couldn't be able to cover the things that I do for this channel. In return, I give them behind the scenes stuff and a shout out in every video. So thank you to my own Celestial, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, Jolt 7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates 63, Fens the Spook, and Mr. Shua TV. You are a group of classy Atarians, and I thank you for all the support. It means the world to me. Okay guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man trapped in a maze with an evil robot and a bouncing happy face for all eternity here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians.